I'll be back.
I can bet you first thought of Arnold Schwarzenegger's iconic Terminator when you first saw this video's title, but I am sure a closer look at it hinted at how this video will go beyond his character and look into some other models that have shaped this franchise as well. When the film first came out in 1984, James Cameron could not have imagined the kind of impact it would have on pop culture and just how quickly this franchise would become a household name. However, the franchise broke all records for popularity, and fans just could not get enough of these titular cyborg soldiers, created by Skynet to destroy humanity. Today I will be focusing on some of the deadliest Terminator models that have appeared across the franchise and tell you everything you need to know about them. T-800 Model 101. Notably known as the Terminator that started it all, Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800 has got to be one of the best models of them all. Not only did this model solidify Schwarzenegger's position in the franchise, but its overall capabilities made it popular and well loved, even though there are definitely other models that might be far stronger or scarier. What helped the T-800 stand out was its undefeated reputation, along with its memorability and likability, in addition to just how much it added to the scare factor. The T-800 was also incredibly durable, and it could withstand attacks, including an entire arsenal targeting it, without suffering from any damage. This model is also one of those deadly names that appear consistently across the franchise's history and play a critical role in the world building, and some might even say that the franchise lives and dies by this character. To top it off, none of the other models can even hold a candle to the T-800's personality, as it starts out as Skynet's face and serves as an ideal assassin before it eventually evolves into a more human-like entity. It first appears in The Terminator, where it is sent back in time to kill Sarah Connor, but it is not long before it is reprogrammed and sent back in time to protect a boy. This particular model also marked a huge breakthrough in Skynet's attempts to create a cybernetic, self-aware organism that was created out of living tissue fitted over a hyper-alloy endoskeleton. This enabled the robot to easily infiltrate among humans, and its CPU was also a neural net processor, or a learning computer, that had detailed information on the human anatomy that helped it understand how to effectively target its victims. T-1000. While the T-800 was a remarkable character, the T-1000 can be best described as one of the most terrifying antagonists in the history of sci-fi. It is undoubtedly a phenomenal villain right from its first appearance in Terminator 2: Judgment Day, wherein it takes the form of a ruthless, unstoppable killing machine. Moreover, this model is designed out of a liquid metal that gives it the ability to shapeshift at will, which only adds to its terror as you never know how or when it might creep up on you. If that was not enough, the T-1000 could also perfectly imitate anyone it came into contact with, and it had the emotional intelligence to understand and replicate human emotions with such precision that no one even doubted it when it blended in as a regular police officer. Across the film and franchise at large, the T-1000 often fought the T-800 and even defeated and disabled it without showing any signs of wear. This highlights its strength and capabilities, and you can only imagine the kind of threat it posed to humanity if it could defeat another one of its own kind with such ease. T-X Terminatrix. Produced by Skynet in the Rise of the Machines timeline, T-X or Terminatrix was one of the more advanced models that appeared in the franchise. It was designed for extreme combat and featured a plasma reactor, an array of weapons, and an advanced exoskeleton made of mimetic polyalloy and protected by malleable ceramic titanium armor. I am sure you must be convinced that these are some intriguing specifications, but to put things into context, the T-X was actually so strong that it had rendered all previous models redundant. It was also created as an anti-Terminator unit capable of controlling machines with the help of the nanotechnological transjector. But some fans believed it had a lot of wasted potential. Admittedly, it was pretty impressive and could remotely control any machinery to the point where it enabled Skynet to rise and kick off Judgment Day. However, some viewers believe that the T-X's deadliness could have been explored even further to fully showcase its capabilities beyond its weapons and arm cannon. Rev 9. Introduced during the Dark Fate storyline, the Rev 9 is an advanced Terminator who falls within the Infiltrator series. It was created with the help of a traditional solid carbon-based endoskeleton with an outer covering of a mimetic polyalloy, and it had the unique ability to separate into two independently functioning units. There is no doubt that it was a deadly model, and to add to that, it was also distinctly human in the sense that it had developed a sense of humor and the ability to lie, apologize, and even have high intellect conversations in addition to strategizing and overcoming crisis situations with wit instead of violence. In this way, this model was rather deadly due to its intelligence, but at the same time it also had incredible strength, durability, and an ability to function even after suffering from gunshots, blunt force trauma, and direct hits from advanced weapons. T-850. After Schwarzenegger established himself as the T-800, he later returned to the franchise as T-850, a rogue cyborg assassin who had been reprogrammed by the human resistance. In this form, Kate Brewster had actually sent it back in time to protect her as well as her future husband, John Connor, when they were younger, and interestingly, this same model did kill John all the way in the future in 2032, before Kate could reprogram it and send it back to the past. While it might be the same character, it had undergone a few minor enhancements, gained deeper insight into human psychology, and could override its programming to function independently while still fulfilling its mission goals. This mode primarily appeared in Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines as a new and improved variant of the T-800, with the newfound ability to tolerate plasma weapons. However, at the end of the day, it was still the same cyborg with brute strength, endurance, and an arsenal of advanced weapons at its disposal. If this was not enough to prove his deadliness, it also had a power cell fitted into its chest that could act as a miniature nuclear bomb. T-600. Terminator Salvation is one of those movies that does not have the largest of fan followings, but it did produce one of the deadliest Terminator models, aka the T-600. This film follows John Connor's character as it dives deep into Skynet's heart to uncover its secrets, and along the way, it introduces us to the T-600 Terminator models that serve as predecessors to the iconic T-800. Even though they are infiltrator models, their production was rather poorly executed, and their slow, clunky nature paired with their prosthetic skin made them unfit to serve as infiltrators. In fact, this model was also known as rubbers when they were first introduced as infiltrators, with basic combat exoskeletons covered with synthetic latex that made it easy for resistance soldiers to spot them on the battlefield. As a result, they were eventually rebranded as infantry units and shoved to the sidelines in the underrated Terminator Salvation series. However, this does not mean that we should easily underestimate them or consider them weak, and John Connor himself barely survived an encounter with one of them. To add to this, Connor faced a T-600 model that had no legs, which only goes to show just how deadly these variants can be, even with all their faults. T-3000. Not to be confused with Terminator 3000, T-3000 was an advanced model created by Skynet to infiltrate and infect humans through exposure to a machine phase matter. This matter would rewrite the victim's genetic coding and essentially force their body mass to turn into billions of nanomachine, and pretty much every single human who was exposed to this ordeal died during the experimental stage itself. In fact, the only person to successfully undergo this procedure was John Connor, and it was a painful and torturous ordeal that helped him gain faster reflexes, better combat abilities, and the power to phase through attacks. Moreover, Connor retained all his memories in this form. He could still replicate human behavior and emotions, and finally, he could shapeshift and even create weapons. While this made him a compelling threat, his nanobot-reliant physiology had its own weakness, such as a high susceptibility to magnetic attacks. Marcus Wright. I will be talking about the Series H models in detail later. Marcus Wright deserves a special mention in this list as a hybrid who first appeared in Terminator Salvation. His story started out as a human being on death row who was executed while his bodily remains were sent over to Dr. Kogan for research purposes at the Cyberdyne Systems Genetic Research Division. Soon enough, he was transformed into a hybrid human and stored in an underground facility in stasis until Judgment Day. Finally, he was activated created in 2018 with no prior memories or knowledge of his true identity, and Skynet eventually discovered him and added further enhancements to elevate his design. His heart and brain were encased in a metal exoskeleton, and his older skin essentially regrew on it to give him a new form. He also had enhanced strength and durability that gave him a slight edge over other models, and his physical capabilities were so elevated that he could hold his ground against a T-Rip in hand-to-hand combat. If that was not enough, he could also connect and manipulate the Skynet network to some extent, but he used this ability with caution, as it resulted in pain and discomfort when he did it for far too long. T-700. Also known as the Cyberdyne Systems Series 700 Infiltration Unit, the T-700 was designed with the intention of serving as an infantry unit. They were a bridge between the easily identifiable T-600s and the robust T-800s, which meant that their exoskeletons were more durable than the T-600s, but slightly weaker than their successor series. This model was also the first Terminator type that was housed in living tissues, thereby marking a huge advancement in the infiltration units. However, these tissues were harvested from the bodies of human captives, which meant their flesh rotted over time and left a stench that made them increasingly identifiable as time passed. This model also did not have any creativity, adaptability, or independent thought, and it largely relied on Skynet for orders and programming. However, they followed these orders to the letter and were skilled killers who even earned the nickname Dog Killer among the Resistance. T-888, 888. Introduced as a variant of the T-800, the T-888 or T-888 was a primary assassin sent by Skynet in the Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicle. It was a part of the Infiltrator series that was created out of living tissue over hyperalloy endoskeletons, but it did undergo several upgrades, ranging from additional armor plating in the back to a new arm and leg plate design, new pistons, and thigh blade. The T-888's head, torso, and limbs were also available in several sizes that allowed for more variety in the living tissue infiltration sheaths, and its CPU ran on a shielded nuclear power cell located within the model's heart. While the T-888 seems to be notably lighter than past models, it was far more speedy, stronger, and resilient to damage. For instance, one of the T-888 models tore an entire bank apart to break through it, and another boarded a speeding van and even targeted its opponents by running through the woods. The T-888 also had wireless control over its physiology in case its CPU and skull were separated, but it is unknown if it could sense or process human emotion. However, we do know that their physiologies are anatomically correct and that they are capable of sexual activity, but it is left up to interpretation if they sense the same range of physical sensation as humans. T-1001. Portrayed by Shirley Manson, the T-1001 was a rogue Terminator who posed as Catherine Weaver, the head of the Zyra Corporation, and infiltrated it during an attempt to build an artificial intelligence that could fight Skynet. Since it was an upgraded version of the T-1000, it had the inherent ability to alter its body mass and shapeshift into other characters. Moreover, it could also override any directives and choose its own goals and missions, in addition to detaching part of its physiology to act independently. It primarily appeared in the form of a human and consistently posed as Weaver, but it had difficulty mimicking human emotions and positive gestures such as smiles. But at the same time, it did have a slight sense of humor. This Terminator model was also programmed towards protecting its son, John Henry, to such an extent that it would do just about anything for his safety, even if it meant putting its human counterpart's daughter, Savannah Weaver, at risk. T-900. I am sure you might be familiar with Cameron Phillips, aka the T-900, but you might not know the extent of damage that it can do with its hardened physiology and advanced features. This model was especially mass-produced by Skynet in an alternate timeline, wherein it acted as the infantry for the Skynet Force. Launched after the T-850 and before the T-X, the T-900 was made up of a hyper-alloy armor endoskeleton covering living organic tissue, and it was not long before it earned a reputation as the humanoid hunter-killer. Interestingly, Cameron Phillips especially stood out as a T-900 model because she exhibited programming for complex human behavior and feelings, as well as the capability to use her environment to her advantage. Admittedly, she might not be as strong as the T-800. Cameron was definitely a lot smarter, tactical, and flexible, which made her an integral part of the franchise. Other than her, there were many different models of the T-900 that were designed by Skynet to fulfill specific purposes, including the T-900 Green that traveled in packs and the T-900 Red that carried Skynet assault cannons and were notoriously hard to terminate. Over the franchise, the T-900 also evolved to the point where they started carrying more and more advanced armor, and interestingly, they were also the first anti-Terminator designed with the intention of defeating the reprogrammed Terminators. T-5000. While many fans complain about Terminator Genesis, I would have to disagree with them, especially when I think about the film's T-5000 model, which was quite literally a physical manifestation of Skynet. This Terminator was so advanced that Skynet had independently opted to transfer its consciousness to it, and it was equipped with the technology to use nanotech to turn humans into T-3000 models. Even though its combat abilities are largely unknown, the T-5000 was still a standout model that carried Skynet's consciousness all the way to the original timeline to infect John Connor and turn him into a T-3000, which truly highlights his antagonistic capabilities. T-950. Introduced as a rather advanced variation of the T-900 Terminator, the T-950 is a bridge between the T-900 and the T-X. This model was created to be an infiltrator, and it had living tissues paired with a hyper-alloy armored endoskeleton that had reconfigurable arms and an ability to store a range of weapons. Just like all other names on this list, the T-950 was an incredibly strong and durable model, and it had even survived punching through steel, concrete, and even full-fledged fire attacks. This model also had the unique ability to fold its arms backward to aim at targets that are lurking behind it. And if this was not enough, it also had a head-up display and an advanced resilience toward EMP weapons. Series H. While I have already talked about Marcus Wright, it would be a great injustice to other hybrid Terminator models if I skipped out on mentioning Series H. Also known as TH or Theta, this model included humans who had been transformed into cybernetic beings, typically as a part of Project Angel. This project was initiated by the Cyberdyne Systems Genetics Division, and Skynet eventually boosted it as Project Theta, which explains the name. Hybrid models developed within this project typically underwent a rigorous process wherein their human bodies underwent a transformation that began with their skeletons being swapped with hyper-alloy replicas. In this process, key organs were retained, and the human did undergo considerable changes to turn into a hybrid model that was much faster, stronger, and more resilient than its past version. These hybrids also retained memories of their childhood, had custom endoskeletons, and living tissue that could regenerate over time, and all of this greatly contributed to their reputation as deadly models. T-101. While very little is known about the T-101, it appeared in the form of an infiltrator model in most of its appearances and is a specialized T-90 humanoid hunter-killer. Its body is covered with living tissue on the outer sheath that can be used to infiltrate human groups, and it was even a key part of the NES game, wherein it was tasked with killing Sarah Connor in 1984. In addition to this, the T-101 also appeared in Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, and in some continuities, it is also known as the T-850. T-1. Also known as the T-1 Battlefield Robot or Ground Assault Vehicle, this Terminator model was the first Terminator-class robot developed by Cyber Research Systems. It was an entirely autonomous ground offensive system designed with the intention of facing and defeating entire battlefields full of opponents with its advanced weapons. This model was also the first generation of Skynet armored battle tank, and it debuted in Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines as a menacing, archaic machinery that successfully served its purpose. While there have been far more advanced models in the future, the T-1 started it all and laid the groundwork for their success, and just for that it deserves a lot more credit than it gets. This model was also capable of identifying multiple targets with the use of heat, motion, and auditory sensors, in addition to having incredible strength and durability. It was also specifically designed to deliver maximum firepower in the smallest amount of time possible, and it was active all the way until 2018, when it was mostly kept at important facilities to guard them and keep the prisoners in check. Hunter-killers, HK Aerials. This Terminator model was armed with missiles, lasers, plasma cannons, and weapons of all kinds, and they were definitely one of the Resistance's toughest opponents. This model also appeared in nearly every single installment of the franchise, and even though most viewers saw it as a vehicle rather than a character, it had a lot of depth to it. To begin with, this model was covered with laser refractive hyperalloy, and it also had a lot of different variants designed for specific purposes. The Mark 7 Aerial was armed with a frontal laser cannon and missiles or seeker mines, and the Mark 8 T-8 Ariel had 2 underslung laser cannon turrets and a frontal plasma cannon. These variants also ranged from patrol models that strolled the future war's wastelands to troop transport variants, surveillance variants, and detainee transports, and they were even deployed to hunt down humans in the Dark Fate timeline. HK tanks. While the T-1 was a truly deadly model, it eventually served as the prototype for an even more dangerous model, aka the HK tanks. Also known as Ground HK, these tanks were essentially one of Skynet's most crucial ground-based combat HK vehicles. They appeared in the form of a humanoid appearance with a rotating tower-like head, steel arms, plasma cannons, and legs that consisted of 2 giant tank treads. As and when the Resistance started deploying anti-HK tactics, these units were somewhat endangered as their parts were even scavenged for heavy weapons, power sources, and armor. This goes to show just how threatening they could be, as the Resistance did everything in their power to get rid of them. At the end of the day, these tactics admittedly did not work out so well, and Skynet even started equipping the new HK tanks with crew compartments, including hidden endoskeletons that could counterattack the human teams. Moto Terminator. Produced by Skynet, the Moto Terminators were automated motorcycles designed by Skynet with the intention of hunting down human beings. This model was a breath of fresh air among the same old Terminator designs, and it was even fitted with red optic sensors and plasma emitters. Moreover, they were incredibly agile, speedy, and had sensors that could anticipate incoming obstacles or debris, which ensured that they were not being slowed down due to any avoidable external factors. Interestingly, they were also the fastest land-based Terminator model, with the capability to go up to 200 miles per hour, making them the perfect fit for when Skynet wanted to chase after escaping humans. While they were not very durable models, the Moto Terminators were still a solid model to rely on, and the Harvester especially made great use of them to succeed in its missions. Hydrobot. Appearing in the form of an eel-like creature, the Hydrobot is a non-humanoid hunter-killer that can be easily distinguished from other Terminator models due to its serpent-like structure. If that does not sound scary already, this entity's head also tapered into a claw, and it lurked in water bodies and patrolled them. This model was typically created by Skynet to patrol the waters, and it could jump through large distances and even operate on land in emergency situations. This in itself makes it a rather terrifying entity, as it has capabilities that most other models lack, and moreover, it could also cut through metal and other such surfaces with its sharp teeth. Unfortunately, the sheer volume of models in the Terminator franchise resulted in an underwhelming response towards the Hydrobots, and that they do not get as much recognition as they deserve. However, anyone who has witnessed them in action can vouch for their deadliness, as they would grab their victims by their claws, pull them into the water, and kill them off before they had a chance to call for help. Harvester. I am sure you all must have been waiting for me to mention the Harvester, who is inarguably one of the bulkiest, most threatening Terminator models across the franchise. Ever since it was popularized in Terminator Salvation, the Harvester has earned quite a fan following, even though it does not appear on screen for a long time. Somehow, this has only added to the character's mystique and terror, and even the Resistance struggles with defeating it. As the name suggests, its primary mission revolves around capturing humans and using their bodies to do stem cell research, which is why this model earned a nickname as the Harvester. On a more technical front, this model is a bipedal non-humanoid hunter-killer produced all the way back in 2016 by Skynet, and it functions in a way that it captures human subjects and then calls a transport to dump their bodies and move towards capturing more humans. Interestingly, the Harvesters also acted as housing units for the Moto Terminators, which suggests that while it might be powerful, it was definitely not speedy and relied on external help in delivering its cargo. T-70. Known as the first Terminator with a humanoid form, the T-70 is a primitive model that stands about 8 feet tall and appears in the form of a foot soldier. It is officially known as the Cyberdyne Series 70 Automated Fighting Infantry Unit, and it typically uses a Gatling gun with motion tracking laser designator that can rattle up to 600 rounds in a minute. In addition to wielding this impressive weapon, the T-70 could travel about 20 kilometers between recharges, and it shares many physical features with the T-800. This is also explained as a result of Cyberdyne's attempt to reverse engineer the T-800's wreckage to create the T-70 in an attempt to impress investors and gain financing to improve their robot technology. And all I can say is that this plan did work out for them. In the next couple of decades, Skynet had managed to mass produce these Terminators cars and even deploy them all over, and Skynet 2.0 even upgraded them in the later RPG timeline. T-7T Tetrapod. Also known as the Tetrapods, the T-7T were one of the earlier Skynet models, and they can be easily identified with their crab-like body and features that give them the appearance of a mechanical spider. The Tetrapods had a rounded upper body, 2 machine gun arms, 4 segmented legs, and they largely appeared in the Machinima series and Terminator Salvation video games. While not much is known about them, they remained active for 2 years from 2017 to 2019 and posed quite a threat to the players. However, their weaknesses, such as the optic sensor on the front and the battery packs on their backs, made them an easy target to wipe out, and they could not sustain themselves, even though they were a rather innovative model with refreshing capabilities. T-1000. As we enter the end, I am sure you must be questioning whether I made a typo somewhere or if a T-1000 actually does exist. Well, much to my own surprise, the T-1000 or the T-Meg is a rather deadly model that can be classified as a non-humanoid hunter-killer. It appears in the form of a giant spider made up of mimetic polyalloy, and it is mostly tasked with guarding Skynet's central core and any other important facilities. Moreover, this unit appears in the form of a fluid model that can easily bend into its background and disguise itself as a support structure that takes its default form only when it detects a threat in the facility. In this situation, it immediately generates stabbing or slashing weapons that protrude out of its appendages and strike down any unsuspecting threats who were lured into a sense of safety upon entering the place. T-Infinity. Finally, I end this list with one of the most fascinating Terminator models, aka the T-Infinity. This prototype was especially created by Skynet to ensure that the timelines remain in balance, and its only goal was to correct the timeline. This model was built with an onboard time displacement equipment that enabled it to move across time and even translocate direct attacks from a weapon in order to dodge it. Just like all the other models I talked about, T-Infinity was supernaturally strong and durable to conventional weaponry, and it also had an additional layer of protection in the form of a blue force field. This force field essentially covered most of its critical weapons and was strong enough to vaporize powerful alloys to ensure the highest levels of protection. While this was all about its inbuilt defenses, T-Infinity also had all kinds of weapons built inside its forearms, which could also rearrange itself to turn into weapons from energy-based machine guns and blades to plasma cannons. All these features contributed towards this model's capability as a lethal fighter, and Skynet made use of it on a couple of occasions in Terminator 2 Infinity and Terminator Revolution. And on that note, I have explored the top 25 deadliest Terminator models across the franchise, ranging from the iconic T-88 and the Rev-9 to the Hydrobot and Harvesters. Now, I am sure that most of your favorite models made it to this list, but I am curious to know what you think of them. I'd also like to know if you have any other suggestions for models that should have made it to the list. So as I wrap this up, I'd love for you to leave a comment and share your views.